So can you just kind of give a little brief overview of who you are and just so I can kind of get to know you more and just give some background?
Yeah, so name is Ajay Batish. My journey's taken me from India through Canada to the US. I was born in India. We moved to Toronto when I was 4 years old. So those are all my formative years, just growing up in Toronto. And I love Canada. I love my Indian heritage, close to that as well. But really, for like the last 27-ish years, it's been, here in the US. And that's really what my career has been about. But married, for just about 24 years, 3 kids, 20, almost 18 and 11. And one of them's on the college journey, the other one is very close to it. Another one's got a pretty long ways to go, so hopefully he will be on the college journey. And, yeah, just, from a professional standpoint, I've spent most of my career, really building companies.
That's really interesting that you talked about moving when you were 4 years old, growing up in Canada. Just can you just kind of talk about what your childhood was like?
Yeah, so, I'd say, growing up in Toronto, it was a lower middle class, sort of like socioeconomic group. Uh, had parents that loved me and my older sister 3 years intensely. At the same time, I also had, a father who was working, often 3 jobs, a mother working full time as well. So, both myself and my sister were pretty independent. That was a formative part of my upbringing is, essentially more moderate means, you could say, but, also essentially having to take care of ourselves. So what, historically people would call latchkey kids. We literally had, a shoestring around our necks with a key on it, and that's how we, got home, took care of ourselves, and there was a fierce streak of independence that certainly built. There was also, I would say, a degree of just trying to understand the world and trying to make sense of it and exploring, taking things apart. I always liked tinkering, whether it was, with like the 110 outlets, and electrocuting myself when I was a kid, or just taking apart toys, putting them back together and doing things like that. So, yeah, I think growing up it was, how do you explore, have fun, with I'd say less means, lots of love, and just a curious mind.
So that's really interesting about we can talk a little bit more how you kind of grew a sense of independence from a young age, but can you just also talk a little did you have any so you had any like pressures for like your future or like what you wanted to do when you were older based on your childhood, especially having to grow up more independent?
Yeah. So, I'd say growing up in an Indian, Hindu, moderately conservative household, the expectation was is that I would be a doctor. So the fact that I was actually always pretty clear that I intended to be an engineer was a real disappointment, especially to my mom. It was probably not until probably 10 years ago that she's finally let go of that. So that's a long time into my life. You know, I'm at a half century mark here right now. So, so certainly some disappointment and certainly some pressure, more so from my mother to go into medicine, which I just never enjoyed. But my father was always pretty supportive of whatever I wanted to do. And I was always pretty clear. I enjoyed math, science, but I really just enjoyed tinkering. So, again, just getting into things, figuring out how things work. And, like I learned electricity, magnetism just by, playing with things at home and taking toys apart. So yeah, that was definitely, formative for me in terms of like the career path that I went down.
I feel like I was going to ask you next if you're able to kind of form your own perspective of what you want to do with your future throughout high school, but it sounds like you already pretty much had what you wanted to do and you stuck with it from when you were younger.
Yeah. For me, I think the path was pretty clear. So by the time I was in high school, I didn't really know what an engineer was, but, it felt like that was the direction that my life was leading in. Technology was really even more specifically what I was, interested in. So when I was maybe 9 years old, the school I went to got a Apple II. So just for a reference, so this is Apple Computer, right? The company, and this is like one of their very first models, the Apple II. It was just one for this whole school, and just because I enjoyed, technology and all of that, when I had time, I would go to the library, just pull out the book on coding, and I just taught myself to code. And so, in between, if I finished my work early, I'd just go to the library, sit down and work on the computer and I just start teaching myself. And so over time, as the schools start to get more computers and had access to more, we could never afford to have our own computer at home. But certainly at school, I really kind of got into it at a pretty early age. So it was clear to me it was not even just engineering, it was more, more deeply along the lines of being involved in information technology and computing.
What choices did you end up making, for your plans at like, after high school? Did you end up kinda choosing college based on your interests that you kept from as a kid? Or what were your main plans? Did you was college not even what you wanted? Like, what was your thought process?
Yeah. Not going to college was not an option, just to be clear. So even though engineering was not what made my mother in particular happy, you know, not going to college was off the tables. And frankly speaking, it wasn't even an idea that I had or a thought that I had that I wouldn't do that. Both my parents, went to college. My father has 2 degrees, my mother has a bachelor's. So that was always just the expectation. That was an unspoken expectation that this is obviously what you'll do. It's just a question of what path, I would go down.
What were your actual plans after high school, like, college-wise, and just how did you manage all of that?
Yeah, so, growing up in Toronto, the college admission process is very different from how it is in the US. And look, honestly, I didn't even look too far away from the colleges at home, but, I was lucky because, the best engineering colleges were all essentially a driving distance from home. So I ended up, my number one pick was University of Waterloo, very well known in engineering, certainly in Canada, but also, internationally as well. Had a great reputation. That's the school I wanted to go to. And so that was my number one pick. I had 3 schools I looked at. Got accepted into all 3, but again, Waterloo is really, really where I wanted to go. And I think that was really a formative step for me in my career. One of the things I loved about that school was they had the world's largest cooperative education program. So think internships, but longer, and more focused, and you're doing a lot more of them all throughout the year. So, in order to graduate from engineering there, you had to essentially do 6 4-month co-ops, and you didn't get summers off. So a 4-year degree became 5 years, but you exited with, 2 years of full experience with up to 6 different jobs. So the opportunity to be able to essentially try out what you're learning in a real world environment and to learn what working is about certainly helped me make some of my choices in terms of which courses I picked and the paths I went down through college, even while I was going through college. Because this is one of those things where you have a general sense of what you want to do, but what exactly do you want to do? And who really knows? I mean, there's a small number of people that do. I think I probably knew pretty well what I wanted to do, but there were still a number of things that were still, questions. But the choice of school for me, is very academically rigorous, but at the same time, very hands on, just helped me understand and try different things out so that by the time I left, I was a little bit clearer. You still never figure it out.
Let's just kinda talk about now what you do. You can talk about the field that you prefer to talk about, even can be more interesting. What do you or did you actually do kinda through the lens of your eyes? Like, what was your work?
Sure. So, I have worked at companies briefly in my times, and, I go back to that story of having learned to code on an Apple II, and Apple was a company that I was very fond of from a very early age before they released the Macintosh and, certainly well before they became sort of a more common household name. And so, in particular, what I really loved about that, and this gets into career choices as well, is that as a company, they were unique in terms of they weren't just about the technology, they were about the impact of what that technology has on people's lives. And so Steve Jobs would talk about it as the intersection of technology and the humanities. And that's really when you get into, building businesses, it's really always about the impact. How do you help those, who you serve as a company? And so that mindset, and by the way, in my co-op terms, my first 3 co-op terms, I did it at Apple. They happened to come to campus, and it was my number one pick, and I fit with what they were looking for pretty highly. So we had a great mesh over there, and I learned a lot in my first few work terms over there, and I got deeper into my passion. By the way, ultimately, I did save up enough money, earning through high school, that I had bought my own Mac before then and had gotten deeper into that space. I worked for a little while after Steve Jobs came back to Apple, just because I wanted to be part of that culture and kind of experience, Apple during what I thought was, a turning point. And I think, luckily did turn out to be as well, because I think they've had a great and pretty profound effect on the industry. But I mean, ultimately, where I ended up going with that is taking the experiences I've had and really building a series of companies over the years. So I had, one company that started with a couple of guys also from the same college, but a few years older. It left that because there's just not a good cultural alignment between all of us. The second company was a software product company that I started with a couple of, of my best friends at the time, also from engineering. The timing wasn't great, but we did get, some traction, ended up selling that to our largest customer at the time, which was Fannie Mae. And then the third company is the one that really I spent, most of my time growing, and that was about a 15-year run, and that was a technology services company. So, what I really enjoy is, I think people think that building companies is about not having a boss. It's not true. You have a lot more bosses. Every one of your customers is a boss, and and there's a lot of work to do also in terms of making sure all your team is taken care of. But ultimately, I really enjoyed the complexity of having to deal with a lot of different things at any given time, and that's the fun of building a company. It's also the stress of building a company, is there's so many different things going on at any given time. So that's something that I had a sense of when I was younger as a kid. It's also something I was fortunate enough I had, a great economics professor, in college, and he really encouraged entrepreneurial activity. And so he himself was an entrepreneur. He was an adjunct professor, but he taught more students than the entire economics department combined, because he was just that popular. He was a fantastic professor. He's written some great books. Professor Larry Smith, he's got a book out there that I recommend. His most current one, I think it's about 5 years old. Definitely worth looking up. I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's a great one when thinking about career and how you build yours. Um, but these were some of the same things he talked about then. But for me, I knew that I enjoyed the challenges of building businesses. I tried that early, and got the bug, and just kind of, stayed with that through the course of my life.
Would you say that you have any regrets, that have surfaced through, because you talked about different jobs you've been through, different people that you've met. Would you say that you have had any regrets through this big time period?
So you certainly make a lot of mistakes along the way, and I think the process of growth is one of just being a little less dumb every day, right? Like, how do I not make the same mistake again, right? As long as you have that mindset, you have to accept that you're going to make a ton of mistakes. And are those mistakes tragic mistakes? And can you avoid those and continue to stay alive as you grow and get smarter over time? So, I'd say, if regrets are mistakes, then I've made a lot of mistakes, but I wouldn't really say they're regrets, because every one of those that's how I learned and that's how I really grew.
Do
It's
you think
hard
that
to
that's
learn from your success,
Oh, that is
but
very true.
failure is the ultimate teacher.
Would you say, though, that this is a message that you would like to just kinda, if you could give out one message, would this be your message to give out, that you should understand the difference between regret and mistakes and be able to learn from mistakes?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's certainly a key message in life, because it's an optimistic message, right? And ultimately, if like for me, by nature I'm an optimist. You don't start companies unless you're an optimist, because there's so many things that can go wrong, and all of those are excuses and reasons not to do it. So you have to be fundamentally optimistic in your outlook if that's what you're doing, right? And that's the lens by which I look at the world. So certainly, it's easy to get caught up into this loop. And I think, society, even more so today probably than, when I was your age, there's a bar that seems to be set in terms of what we see out there on TV, in movies, social media, right? And these are just unreal bars and expectations. And I think the best thing you can do is give yourself a break, cut yourself some slack and just understand that we're all humans and anybody that you see and read about is as imperfect as everybody else. And so the difference is just really how do you navigate? And so, yes, absolutely. I think looking at life as a series of opportunities to learn and get better is the reframing of regrets.
So sorry, just to clarify, so for this third company you worked with for over 10 years, you said, was this your company
15.
that you 15? Was this your company that you founded?
Yes.
So with kind of being able to, build these companies, would you say that you were kind of born with or from a young age you had this kind of mindset going into this type of work field? Or is this something you had to build up throughout maybe your past work all the way up to this 15-year company?
I wouldn't say there's anything unique and special about me that makes me more inclined to go and build a company successfully versus anybody else. I think most things in life are essentially it's a matter of, you know, what is the level of focus that you have and what is how much time on task that you have, right? Like how much do you practice it and practice doing it well? And again, that goes back to the learning. So truly, I think most people can do most things very well. Some things, there's going to be genetic limitations. I'm not going to be a professional basketball player. I might be able to put up a great 3 point if I really work at it. But, at 6 foot that's going to be a little bit more difficult. There's limited positions for me, and then other health considerations come into play. But when you eliminate some of those things at the edges, truly, I think success for most people is really just about what do you want to focus on, and do you have the passion to be able to push through that? Because there's a lot of drudgery involved. In terms of running a company, there's, I think, often, this perception that, running a company is glamorous, and there's glamorous aspects of it. But most of it is just drudgery, right? And so, like, what is that passion that takes you through and is really kind of driving you day to day and, week to week?
Would you say that your parents or your childhood environment had any impact of exactly what this like where you are today in the sense of mindset? Like, did you grow up kind of coming out with a sense of discipline, passion, or was that all you?
Yeah. So discipline is not something that I learned a lot as a kid, but people would describe me as pretty disciplined right now. That's something that I've learned over time that helps me, if you will, be less stupid every day. It's just an easy cheat code for being able to perform at a higher level. Um, but hard work is something I got at an early age because I saw how hard my parents worked. And so I started my first job when I was 11 years old, delivering newspapers, and then by 13 years old, working at a gas station. And then from there, I never stopped working because from there, I overlapped that job even right into college, even while I was doing co-op terms over there. And, so really I've been working since I was, roughly 11 years old. Hard work is easy for me. And there's a satisfaction to work that I enjoy, and you can enjoy almost anything you do. If you frame it in the right way, right? If you can find what's interesting about it and how you can, develop yourself through it. So just like the gas station job, I would say is like one of the more formative jobs that I had. It was self-serve gas, and then there was a full-serve part of the gas station, and there was a car wash. Started off in self-serve, and then full serve, and then learning the car wash, and also just even fixing the car wash, right? And then running the gas station. But customer service as another key element of that, right? Like, how do you essentially make people happy, even with simple things like pumping gas? It's amazing what you can learn from that.
Would you say now this is kind of moving a little bit back to what you've talked about actually your actual what you actually did. So would you say that there are any misconceptions about like being an engineer that you kind of have kind of almost like busted over the years, or any myths, or just kind of anything you've been like, that's not so accurate, or this wasn't really so bad.
So engineering is one of these things that, I think people will see it as sort of a cut and dry profession. And really, it's a very creative profession. There's a lot of creativity that goes into it. So, if there's a misconception, I would say that is one of them. The other one is really more of an understanding that, engineering is, it's like certain other professions in that, it's a great launch pad into doing a lot of different things. So historically, if you look at the, company founders and their backgrounds, it used to be MBAs. But increasingly you see that the most common path to, to being a founder and running a company is actually as an engineer. It's not because they teach you business skills, but it's problem solving skills is fundamentally what you're learning, and you're combining it with a lot of creativity to go and solve, frankly, any problem that you decide. But it's that approach that you learn that's more important than, frankly, even the hard skills of engineering that that you end up learning. So, again, if it's misconceptions, it's really just it's not a rigid career. It's a fairly flexible and fairly creative career that you can use to launch into a lot of different things.
So now, kind of zooming out, what advice would you give to maybe a kid my age or someone with your ethnic or socioeconomic background or just any similar background? And even if you want to go broad, just really any kid my age who wants to become an engineer or who doesn't know how to pursue what they want. What advice would you give to someone to trying who's trying to do what they want to do with their life?
Yeah. So probably a couple things. The most important thing I would say is find people that you can talk to who have been on the path that you're considering or that the path that you want to be on. Essentially, establish mentors in life. And then, even once you've established mentors, find those people in life that will essentially keep you in check. They'll help act as a great sounding board for you. You'll have your own thoughts and ideas, but, it's easy to kind of, run astray. But when you have, you know, essentially your own board of, directors, if you will, in your life, helping you along on that journey, it just becomes a lot easier. You learn from them, they learn from you, and again, mentorship in particular, right? So having that guidance, I'd say, is the most important thing in terms of just, achieving your goals. Beyond that, in terms of, I think, and I hear this from from other kids as well, and certainly, I mean, even when I was probably at this stage as well in high school with a lot of my other friends as well, trying to kind of figure out what you want to do. And again, here too, I think give yourself a break. You don't need to have it all figured out. There's really no big deal about going down a path and then picking a different path later on in life. A lot of people do it. A lot of people are very successful when they do it. And it's not just that they're switching and having to give up years of their life invested in one thing. Often those other things that they did give them perspectives that are unique compared to others who have gone down that path maybe directly. So just trust the serendipity that happens in life, and just trust that life is going to, work out well. And if you have that frame of mind, I think, you end up in a happy place. To me, like happiness is what it's about. And really happiness to me, is really about fulfillment. How do you, find fulfillment as an individual, and how do you, then help and, influence others as well? That's also part of the fulfillment. But if you do those things, find good people to help you in life, right? And to keep you in check. Um, and essentially, cut yourself some slack, um, and learn to love what you're doing. I think success is all but assured.
With kind of this idea of fulfillment and honestly growing up in a household where you're kind of try you're the norm was to have a certain career field, would you say with all this knowledge, would you kind of convince your children or did you or will you or do you want to convince your children to pursue similar career paths as you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Uh, I don't try to uh, nudge or push my kids in any direction. So I kind of give them the same sort of guiding principles, which is, effectively figure out what you love to do, because if you love what you're doing, then it's not work anymore. And and again, it's not like something you're born with that I will love this. I think you can grow to love a lot of different things. And so it's just figuring out something that you feel passionate enough about and getting deeper into it. And then often that's the path to really kind of connecting with it and finding that passion. But find those things that you're passionate about. And really, I think, what I tell my kids is figure out how you want to make the world a better place. How do you want to impact other people in a positive way? If you're doing those things, again, like success is always on the other side of that.
Do you just have any final thoughts or any questions you have for me before we conclude?
Yeah, where are you on your career path, and just like thinking through your career, and what are the options you're looking at right now? Where do you think this your life potentially takes you?
Well, at 15, I feel like it's one of those things where, I mean, it's just like you said, like I don't know too much, and also it does like I don't know if I'm gonna end up switching this and switching that after college if I didn't like my major or if I don't like this and that. So I mean, honestly, for me, I really have not too much sense, but I do know that my interests are more in astronomy, like astrophysics, or even the engineering side, like aerospace engineering. So for me, that's kind of where my interests are, but I don't really know where that would take me or with college, like how that's gonna change or warp anything. So for me, like those are my main interests is like more about space and astronomy.
Awesome, awesome. And then, how is it in terms of? Do you feel any pressure being the son of like very successful parents?
I feel like there's always going to be a pressure when you are just even for me, it isn't even also because like when you look at the success of your parents, that is definitely added pressure, but it's also more of to like what they do because you feel a sense of that's what you know, that's what you grow up with, and when they're successful and that's all you really know, it kinda creates an environment that I mean, that's the reason why I started this podcast too, is because I feel like I wanted to learn more about different career paths. So I feel like there's pressure, but then there's also like a stress to kind of perform at the level of my parents and do similar to what they do, especially because I don't know much outside of that.
Right. Well, been an awesome pod. Enjoy the conversation, Andrew.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing what you end up deciding over the coming years, and I'm sure and certain you're going to be successful, regardless.
Thank you. I know that's the goal.
Yeah, I will actually leave you with one last thing, which is sort of like a simple, formula for success. And if you think about it as a ratio, it's what what you have over what you want. And so if you can get that ratio to be greater than one, you're happy. But the whole key to it is that everybody focuses on the top, and the easy hack for success is to focus on the bottom. If what you want isn't that particularly, isn't that much, if you can keep that in a reasonable check, what you have will automatically grow and happiness comes early in life.
Thank you. I really appreciate that wisdom.